Okay, it is March 16 of 2014. We're going to take a look at Volume 1 of Paul RICOEUR's Systematic Phenomenology. He wrote it while he was at the University of Chicago, and Volume 1 is on memory, but it is really, Volume 1 is his basic phenomenology, and it's an expansion of the phenomenology that he articulated in 1976. But now he has matured, and he has given a more systematic presentation that includes the Greek concepts that he borrows from Plato and Aristotle. So he likes to rely on the ancient Greek. He does that throughout all of his writing. And this first volume was not very large. It was 133 pages. But it's just very strictly just the presentation of his phenomenology. So we'll take a look at that, and we will use the structure that he established in 1976, and therefore begin with the unconscious, then transfer across the axis threshold, and then discuss finally the 3 moments of the cognitive work of phenomenology. And then that leads, of course, in a return back to the unconscious, to the counterblow, or the Hegel's term counterblow. RICOEUR prefers the concept of icon. We return with an aesthetic picture icon that becomes the basis of our motivational set. And that icon image more or less makes up RICOEUR's notion of counterblow. So he has his own conceptualization of what that term means. And of course, as he did in 1976, he assumes the system is already running. And therefore, there already has been a return. There already is an existing icon in the self's memory that already influences our work of phenomenology in the unconscious when we confront an external situation. So there already is the presence of a counterblow icon. Now for RICOEUR, we'll start by defining that icon. And he says that after the system runs, we get the return out of the conceptual back into the unconscious to qualify our motivational base in the unconscious. And it is that which makes up the fringe hermeneutical influence that will assist us in our phenomenology in the sensate world. He says that there are 5 aspects of this icon type influence. And one, it's an abbreviation as a sign model picture. It presents a revelation of a deeper sense of meaning. It's aesthetic. It takes the form of an artistic picture. And it is a transcendence as a retrieval of tradition, but beyond the estrangement. And this resides more or less in non-propositional form, more of an aesthetic form as our motivational base of the explored unconscious. It stores our motivations, our convictions, and our feelings associated with those convictions. And we carry that with us unconsciously all the time, and it does get called up during our encounter with the external world. And at our first stage of encountering the external world in our phenomenology. And for RICOEUR, that is the very first stage is pathema. And pathema means to endure. So it's not about forming intellectual ideas. That kind of gets bracketed away. All cognitive work gets kind of bracketed for the meantime. And the pathema is basically our enduring of the sensate presentation of the emerging event in our external world So it's simply our enduring the emerging event. It's an enduring that implies that the emerging event interrogates us, and therefore it is an enduring. The self is immediately, even the very first stage, the self is already existentially involved. And so the first stage is a apothema enduring of the sensate presentation of the emerging event. And here's where RICOEUR kind of outlines his goals, his presuppositions. He says that self is to seek to arrange a hierarchy of 4 levels of the imagination: the unreal, the possible, the utopian, and the other of transcendence. And we seek to form a tupos, that means imprint, an imprint type model of reality and the self. Now at this stage, that means acquiring the atomic propositions of single units of meaning. We're not involved in trying to construct an ontology yet. That is bracketed away. We just want to grasp the singular units of meaning, or in a linguistic sense, the atomic propositions. And then he says imagination will be coupled with recollection, so we will have a kind of a mechanical storage area where we store these initial feeling percepts. And out of this, there will be an inscribed graphe that is formed when we transition to a language act. And then out of that, we will eventually move on to a sign-like techne representation of a family resemblance to the otherness of transcendence trying to emerge in the event. And he calls this the eventual goal of reaching a mnemonic model or token of remembrance that is continually kept in the mind because it is imprinted. It is a tupos. And tupos is a Greek word of imprinting coins, imprinting the image of Caesar on a coin. So tupos means to deeply embed the self's personality, to deeply stamp the psyche of the individual. And eventually we're going to reach this tupos that will imprint our entire psyche. But first we're going to pass through this graphe language act. And in order to do that, he says that the next step, graphe, is a zographema. That means an inscribing of life process. A zoegraphema type inscribing of the self. It's an inscription of pathos, or the endured experience of the event of being. It's not recollection. It's declarative memory as a distinct mark of the self. And it is articulated by enlisting the use of imagination. So the zographema equals thought picture. The Greek term zographema means thought picture. So you're going to take these singular units, these atomic proposition feeling percepts, you're going to unite them into an interrelated unity, but it's going to be an aesthetic unity, a kind of a thought picture. So it's an inscribed picture of living being. It represents 2 elements: the phantasma, the picture representation itself, and the icon aspect. And that will be the aspect of the otherness of transcendence that will be reflected within the thought picture. So it is our picture of the overall ordering and interrelatedness of these feeling percepts, but the overall thought picture will also present our feelings concerning this transcendence, this icon-type transcendence that is trying to emerge. And this graphe, zographema thought picture gets informed by the returning icon that we have as a motivational base. So our motivational base is going to be employed here in kind of a tangent type way in this articulation and construction of a thought picture on these newly acquired feeling percepts. We have a new lexical group of feeling percepts that have been acquired. We want to group them into a graphe thought picture, and we will rely on our own called up unconscious motivation icon, because it is an aesthetic icon image. And that aesthetic icon will unconsciously influence everything we do when we articulate this thought picture. So the returning fringe hermeneutic as icon influences the thought picture, and it is a singular kinetic event enclosing a set of phonological entities. Well, phonological entities, that means the voice of transcendence trying to emerge in the event, speaks through these singular elements of deeper meaning that they emerge and make up those first atomic propositions of truth of feeling percept units. Now from there, RICOEUR takes us to, since this is singular kinetic event, the next area to go to is going to be the communal, where we share our experience, our thought picture of a singular kinetic event with other individual selves who are also existentially oriented and concerned about the deeper meaning of life. And we share in what RICOEUR calls a threshold of active searching, the Dokunta threshold. And now we start looking at a succession of kinetic events and not just a singular isolated kinetic event. We start looking at kinetic events that have evolved as a succession. And we do a comparison of sharing with each other, discussing the magnitude of the truth of the atomic propositions and the magnitudes of truth of the holistic ordering, interrelated orderings of these atomic propositions. So magnitude is discussed, structure is discussed, and so it keys in more on what RICOEUR calls the phantasma as dynamism. The phantasma event as a dynamism or relatedness. So we're really concentrating on structure here at the communal level. And we will, through our dialogue and through our very critical dialogue with others, we will form the first analytical, descriptive recollection of the thought picture. And he calls this a laborious recollection. So it involves some recollection of the succession of kinetic events that have been stored. So it's a laborious, deeply encoded thought picture rather than simply being feeling percepts. Now they begin to take on kind of a proto-sign-like quality. We end up with a deeper encoded holistic order of percepts because we're exchanging the ideas about the magnitude of truth with other selves at that same threshold, and it is a labor of interrogating each other. It's a labor of critically evaluating each person's offering of the singular kinetic event and each person's offering of how that singular kinetic event is integrated within the succession of kinetic events in history. And so we get to many different levels of association that are considered, and through these different levels of association, we eventually start emerging from feeling percept to the status of proto-signs. Not signs yet, but they are emerging toward becoming signs. So our atomic propositions are transitioning from feeling percept to sign through the Dokunta threshold of dialogue. So dialogue creates the transition from percept to sign. And so it's an arising descriptive model that emerges, and it emphasizes the essential semantic elements within our thought pictures. Some of the elements in our thought pictures have hints of a semantic type deeper significance, and we start to partition those out and give them a greater magnitude of weight, and we therefore end up with a lexical content of proto-signs. So from percept to sign through dialogue, Dokunta dialogue, to borrow Aristotle's term, and that takes us to that level that we've called in the past, that level of true subjectivity, and that is called in phenomenology, that is the axis threshold. It's the axis point of the true subject, and that will it is a stretched out subjectivity that has moments within it. It's not a singular moment. There are a series of moments within the axis point of true subjectivity, and so we want to look at that series of moments next. And for RICOEUR, the very first moment of the true subjectivity is going to be the actual imprinting of the self with the sign model now. Instead of a thought picture, it's now a thought picture of percepts. It's now a sign model of a grouping of singular units of sign-like quality. And RICOEUR calls this the techne imprinting. Now, techne imprinting is contrasted with praxis imprinting. Techne imprinting is the ideal model. Now, in Hegel, that's the realm of ideation, where we shape our ideal model of reality. So for RICOEUR, it's the realm of tupos techne. Now, it's the realm of ideation, but he calls it the techne imprinting of the ideal sign-like representation. So a sign-like, what he calls a semeion sign-like representation includes expectation and signaling, and it is constructed by negating the non-essential aspects of the feeling percept model that was transitioned into this area. So there is a negation that takes place of the non-essential, and then the sign model is formed. The interest of the will emerges here, volition emerges, and there's a distinction is born between the theoretical and the practical, or what RICOEUR called the techne and the praxis type of imprinting within the self. There's a tupos techne of the ideal imprinting. There's a tupos praxis of the practical imprinting of how we want to actualize this in the world. But the first moment is going to be the techne, and it's enacted through that step of dialogue and the Dokunta threshold that set the kinetic singular event in motion. And through the setting in motion, through this kinesis, we arrive at the semeion sign-like representation. Now again, RICOEUR very seldom allows the self to release the motivational base of the icon aesthetic image, and the icon aesthetic image again influences this model, the sign model also. So we do have some input from icon at the tupos techne moment. So the tupos imprint within the self becomes an expectation of an emerging memory event. So here RICOEUR calls it memory event. It's a sign memory event, but we have an expectation now. The volition of the self has been enacted. We have an interest in seeing it actualized in the world. And so the idea of searching is born, which is zetasis in the Greek. Zetasis, searching, is born. And so that leads us to the transition to the tupos praxis, the practical imprinting, because the ideal is not particularized. It's not the ideal model is too abstract to actualize, so we have to make it more concrete. So there's the moment of the two-pas praxis. It's the copying of the ideal techne, but it's a copying that at the same time integrates the apprehension of the available possibilities that are facing us in the external world, where we will know where to target our how to shape the sentence of our positing, and how to target where we want to implement that praxis-based concrete positing. So the virtual schema is concentrated into image here, and that's the transition that RICOEUR likes to emphasize. He says these two moments are basically a look at the transition from schema to image, from schema to image, virtual schema to praxis-based image. That's the transition we're looking at within the psychology of the self. This is the true subjectivity of the self. We have this transition moment from virtual ideal schema to praxis-based image for specific positing. And he says this is a struggle because it's a struggle against the self's habits. And we do transcend habit by working through meditating on the ideal theoretical techne, by recognizing the otherness of a emerging event in the external world we face with the emerging possibilities. And so we give the virtual techne a posited position. We target a position in the external world, and we form what RICOEUR calls the compound proposition that is includes the praxis-based possibilities. So we no longer have an atomic proposition. We have a compound molecular proposition that includes a multiplicity of possibilities that we want to enact. They're shaped in a specific ordering arrangement. And now we want to actualize that through differentiation. So we write a very practical sentence. He calls it a sentence when he gets to the practical rather than a proposition, but we form the image sentence of positing. We form the image sentence of positing, which is very practical and very concrete, and that transitions us out of the purely techne virtual idealism of the first imprint that were received after our Dokunta dialogue. So RICOEUR has got us right on the fringe now of entering that cognitive realm, where we are actually going to work out the cognitive implications of the two-pas imprint of the techne ideal. When RICOEUR takes us to the cognitive side of consciousness, the first thing he wants to tell us is that we are engaged in a realm of needing to maintain an orthos logos. We need to initiate and maintain an orthos logos, and that is the straight path of the directional sense of reality. The straight path of the logos of the emerging event needs to be initiated to create its emerging birth and then sustained. Now it's initiated through a play of forces where the self can shape its intention into something concrete. And we are involved now, the self is very much involved in a search for truth, a search for aletheia, and actualization begins and is sustained by what RICOEUR calls the exercising memory. The exercising memory is that which will create true image, the true concrete image that we want to emerge. And there must be a negation of false ideologies that distort reality, that legitimize false powers, and that impose rigid symbolic systems. All that must be negated, and instead we want to enter the womb of history and coax the emerging event into actualization. And we do this by positing our very practical sentence of possibilities out of our virtual imprinting of the ideal. But RICOEUR says we also enlist the motivational emotions of our body state. Again, icon. Here's icon and the unconscious getting called up again in the realm of positing. So you can take the entire system here for RICOEUR, and fundamentally he pivots everything off of icon. To him, the most significant moment within the subjective self is the aesthetic icon that is shaped as our motivational base of convictions. And even in the realm of cognitive positing, it is always coupled with the icon positing as well. That is more on a feeling level. And so we end up with a triad of positing for RICOEUR, and he says it includes the lamentation side of our body state as well. He says the body state for RICOEUR is not all positive. The body state also contains a stored area of lost objects. He calls it a memory area of lost objects, of past ventures in positing that failed, where the otherness of transcendence was not allowed to emerge. And these failed attempts, whether it be our experiences, some third world country experiences, or experiences in dictatorships or oppression or starvation, or any of those circumstances, are situations where the self stores a body of what he calls lamentations. Similar to Moltmann's hope and lamenting body state, RICOEUR has a hope and lamenting body state. There's the hopeful motivational base of the icon, but the icon is coupled with the lamentation of lost objects. So you've got icon plus lamentation of lost objects that make up the body state. That is posited for block 1 in our triad. The second block is the work of memory as the techne theoretical will. So it's the techne sign model. So we've got the icon and lamentation body state plus the techne theoretical will. Those are coupled together to create the tupos praxis, practical positing, that is qualified by what RICOEUR calls the imperative of justice. It is qualified by the imperative of justice, that is your generic ethical concept, the imperative of justice. And so that takes us to RICOEUR's entirely new idea for logos in this first volume. In 1976, he had a three-level version of logos that gave us a phenomenology type way of acquiring the objectivity of logos. And he changes everything in this systematics. And he says, I need to introduce a new concept for logos, and that is the concept of debt. And so he presents here a logos of indebtedness, or a logos aphrilos, a logos of indebtedness. We are indebted to those who have gone before us. We need to take an inventory of our heritage, and we give ethical priority to all victims in society. We must negate any abusive memory by assuming that we always speak for the victims, or by imposing a memorial model over the true historical model. And indebtedness is given its trajectory or horizon by the collective memory. At this time, it'll be the composition threshold. Instead of the Dokuntha threshold, the composition threshold is the cognitive semantic side. But there is that's where we gain our horizon or our trajectory. And so history ends up being taken as a phenomenological subject of its own, and meaning equals the historical knowing of meaning. And meaning is equated with a shaped narrative and of enclosed differentiations of history. And that enclosed narrative of differentiations will reveal an orientation, and that orientation will be spoken. It'll be a speech event of illocutionary force, or in other words, our gathering together and forming this collective of differentiations is going to be a shaping of a promise. It's going to be illocutionary, shape of promise. And all of this work, of course, is going to return back into the interiority of the self. And RICOEUR says we create a hollowed out place within the interiority of the subjectivity. For this definition of collective consciousness, the collective impressions, notions, and passions are evaluated at the composition threshold, and it will constitute a surpassing of memory where we reach true otherness. It's a measuring of the otherness through the event that is discussed with others in a critical, analytical way to shape this narrative of enclosed historical differentiations. The narrative of enclosed historical differentiations. And so we end up with a cognitive sign model. A cognitive sign model that is never leaves its foundation of indebtedness to others who went before us. We are eternally indebted to those who preceded us. We are directed toward those who suffer. We are directed toward those who are victimized. And we shape everything according to this logos of indebtedness. So it's a very strong ethical base for RICOEUR. And it all evolves at the composition threshold, where we compile what RICOEUR calls a collection of the traces of otherness, a collection of traces, a sulego ikne. A sulego ikne, that's a collection of traces. And a collection of traces, in the Greek, it means the footprint. So it's the footprint of the otherness of transcendence that is visible in an emerging event. We can see the directional footprints of how otherness wants to emerge, what horizon it is aiming for, what is its trajectory. So it's a gathering of a collection of traces, which is called a phenomenology group, a group of traces. And we continue to gather new propositional content and new promise-type illocutionary forms. And RICOEUR says at this composition threshold, we will continually emerge from framework to framework to framework. We never finalize, the final, complete, perfect model. We always return to the unconscious and come all the way back full circle to evolving to the next framework, and to the next cognitive sign model framework. So eventually we do reach an ontology, but it's an ontology of promise. It has illocutionary force, and it is founded on eternal indebtedness. We never escape indebtedness. So RICOEUR's model is a very strong ethical model for his phenomenology. And it reflects volume 1 of his text on memory, history, and forgetting, published by the University of Chicago. So that's 30 minutes. We'll wrap it up there for this first volume.